Have you ever looked around a crowded dinner table, surrounded by the people whose blood runs in your veins, and realized you're completely invisible? They say blood is thicker than water, but in my family, blood was just an excuse to drown me. So I finally stopped swimming. If you look at the photo albums of my parents' house, you'll see a story of a perfect, all-American family. You'll see my older sister Madison with her beauty pageant crowns, her varsity cheerleading uniforms, and her blinding rehearsed smile. You'll see my younger brother Liam, the golden boy, gripping baseball trophies and standing proudly next to my beaming father. If you look very closely, tucked in the background of the few of these photos, usually half-blurred or partially cropped out, you'll see me, Tilo, the middle child, the ghost. From the time I was old enough to form memories, I understood my place in the family hierarchy. I wasn't a participant, I was an audience member. My mother, Brenda, was a woman who treated motherhood like a competitive sport. Madison was her show pony, her second chance at the high school glory she felt she had missed. My father, Richard, was a stoic, emotionally unavailable man who only came alive when Liam was on a pitcher's mound. I, on the other hand, was an afterthought. I was the child who didn't cause trouble, who got straight B's, who blended into the beige wallpaper of our suburban Ohio home. The neglect wasn't always loud or abusive in the cinematic sense. It was a slow, quiet freezing over. It was the way Brenda would spend hundreds of dollars on Madison's prom dress, but hand me a $20 bill and point me toward the thrift store when I needed a winter coat. It was the way Richard would memorize Liam's batting averages, but couldn't remember what grade I was in when our neighbor, Mrs. Munn, Gable, asked him over the fence. The most defining moment of my childhood, the one that solidified my status as a stranger in my own home, happened on my 16th birthday. In most families, Sweet 16 is a milestone. I didn't expect a car with a giant red bow. I didn't even expect a party, but I did expect, perhaps foolishly, to be acknowledged. I woke up that morning with a flutter of anticipation. I walked downstairs to the kitchen. My mother was frantically packing a cooler. My father was yelling for Liam to find his cleats. They were heading to a weekend travel baseball tournament 3 states away. "Morning," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Cleo, there's cereal in the pantry," Brenda said without turning around. "We're leaving in 10 minutes. Make sure you lock the doors at night. Aunt Sylvia is on standby if the house catches fire, but don't bother her unless someone is bleeding." They rushed out the door. The house fell into a deafening silence. No card, happy birthday. Not even a pat on the shoulder. I spent my 16th birthday sitting on the porch swing watching the neighborhood kids ride their bikes. At around 4 in the afternoon, Uncle Greg, my dad's estranged, slightly eccentric brother, pulled into the driveway. He walked up the steps, holding a single, slightly squished chocolate cupcake with a lit candle sticking out of it. "Happy birthday, kiddo," he said, sitting next to me. He didn't ask where my parents were. He already knew. Uncle Greg was the black sheep of the family, and looking back, I realized he recognized a fellow outcast when he saw one. That cupcake tasted through angry, hot tears was the only sweetness I got that year. You would think that as I grew older, I would rebel. But the twisted thing about emotional neglect is that it often breeds desperation. I wanted their love so badly that I became the family fixer. I became the designated driver when Madison snuck out and got too drunk at frat parties. I became the unofficial tutor who wrote Liam's history papers so he wouldn't get kicked off the team. I cleaned, I cooked, I anticipated their needs. I thought that if I made myself indispensable, they would have to love me. The illusion shattered completely during my college graduation. I had paid my own way through a state university by working full-time night shifts at a diner. When graduation day arrived, I sent them an invitation months in advance. The morning of the ceremony, I received a text from Brenda. "Car is making a weird noise. Dad says we shouldn't risk the drive. So proud of you, though. Have a nice dinner on us." I stood in my cap and gown, surrounded by cheering families, holding a generic text message. But the real knife twist came a few hours later. While sitting alone in my cramped dorm room eating cold takeout, I opened Facebook. There, right at the top of my feed, was a photo Brenda had just posted. They weren't stranded with a broken car. They were at a high-end steakhouse downtown. The caption read, "Celebrating Madison's big promotion to senior account executive. So proud of our superstar." A cold, heavy stone settled in my stomach. The tears didn't come. Instead, the chilling clarity washed over me. I wasn't just unloved, I was actively discarded. I packed up my dorm that night, drove back to my hometown, and moved my few belongings into a cheap basement apartment on the other side of the city. I didn't tell them my new address. It took them 3 weeks to notice I was gone, and even then Brenda only called to ask if I had taken her favorite Tupperware. 4 years passed. By 26, I had built a respectable, quiet life for myself. I worked in logistics, managing supply chains. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and I had a small circle of friends who treated me better than my blood relatives ever had. I maintained a polite distance with my family. I showed up for Thanksgiving and Christmas, stayed for exactly 2 hours, smiled tightly, and left. I thought I'd erected walls high enough to protect myself from them. I was wrong. The catalyst for the final implosion was my grandmother, Nora. Nora was my mother's mother, a sharp-tongued, fiercely independent woman who terrified Brenda. Nora was also the only person in the family who ever looked at me and actually saw me. She used to send me books in the mail with little notes tucked inside. To my quiet observer, she would write, "Still waters run deep, Cleo." When Nora passed away suddenly from a stroke, I was devastated. At the funeral, the family dynamics were on full display. Brenda was putting on a theatrical performance of grief, clutching Pastor Dave's arm and wailing whenever someone walked by. Madison wore a black designer dress that looked more suited for a cocktail party. Liam was texting in the back pew. I sat alone, quietly weeping for the only woman who had ever made me feel human. A week later, the family was summoned to the office of Mr. Iyaya Harrison, Nora's longtime attorney, for the reading of the will. Brenda strutted into the office like she had already won the lottery. She had been talking for days about how she was going to use her mother's money to remodel the kitchen and buy a boat for Richard. Mr. Harrison, a dry, humorless man, read through the standard legalese before getting to the estate. He cleared his throat. "To my daughter, Brenda, I leave the sum of $10,000. To my grandchildren, Madison and Liam, I leave $5,000 each." The air in the room was sucked out. Brenda's face turned the color of spoiled milk. 10,000, that's impossible. She had a house, investments. "Please, let me finish," Mr. Harrison said sternly. He looked down at the document. "And to my granddaughter, Cleo Harper, who always understood the value of hard work and the quiet dignity of independence, I leave the remainder of my estate, including the sale of my property and all liquid assets. This amounts to approximately $450,000. The silence that followed was suffocating. I sat frozen, staring at the mahogany desk. $450,000. It was life-changing money. It was security. It was freedom. "There's been a mistake," Richard boomed, standing up. Nora's mind was going. She wouldn't leave everything to Cleo. "Mrs. Nora was of perfectly sound mind, I assure you, Mr. Harrison replied coolly. "These documents were updated 6 months ago and are ironclad." Bad more mouth. Pharaoh. What followed was the most agonizing car ride of my life. My parents demanded I come back to their house to sort this out. Like a fool, still partially conditioned to obey, I agreed. We gathered in the same living room where I had been ignored for 2 decades. The polite masks were completely gone. Brenda paced the floor, her eyes wild. "You know you can't keep this, Cleo," she started, her voice dripping with fake sweetness, a tone she used when she was trying to manipulate a situation. "Your grandmother was confused. You don't need this kind of money. Liam has that tech startup he's trying to get off the ground, and Madison is planning her wedding. This money belongs to the family." "I am the family," I said, my voice trembling but finding traction, and grammar specifically left it to me. "Oh, please," Madison scoffed from the armchair. "You're going to hoard it in a savings account. You don't even have a life, Cleo. What are you going to do, buy a nicer basement apartment?" "That's enough," Richard snapped, but not at Madison. He glared at me. "Cleo, you will contact Mr. Tart Harrison tomorrow and sign the rights over to your mother. We raised you. We put a roof over your head. You owe us this. Don't be a selfish brat." Selfish. The word echoed in my mind. I had sacrificed my teenage years to keep their perfect picture intact. I had asked for nothing, received nothing, and survived. And now they were demanding the only gift I had ever been given. But the real twist, the absolute dagger to the heart, didn't come until the next morning. Determined to secure my inheritance, I went straight to my bank to open a new high-yield account for the transfer. The cheerful banker, a woman named Sarah, started running my information to set up the profile. Suddenly she frowned. "Ms. Harper, I'm looking at your credit report to verify your identity and, well, I need to ask, are you aware of the delinquent accounts in your name?" My blood ran cold. "What accounts?" "I only have one credit card, and I pay it off every month." Sarah turned her monitor toward me. There were 3 massive lines of credit. One was a joint auto loan, another was a maxed-out platinum credit card. The third was a personal loan, totaling over $60,000. "These were opened 6 years ago," Sarah said gently, "right around the time you turned 18. The billing address is listed as—" She read off my parents' address. I felt physically ill. My vision tunneled. I realized why my father had been so quick to dismiss my college ambitions, why he claimed they couldn't afford to help me. They hadn't just neglected me. They had financially ruined me behind my back to fund their lifestyle. The platinum card opened the month Madison bought her first car. The personal loan, the exact amount they had spent on the backyard pool. They had literally mortgaged my future to pay for my siblings' present. I didn't call them. I didn't scream. The anger I felt was too cold, too absolute for shouting. I walked out of the bank with copies of the credit reports. I went to a lawyer of my own, a ruthless, shark-eyed litigator I found online. I handed him the reports, the will, and told him the entire story. "I don't just want the inheritance," I told him, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "I want to press criminal charges for identity theft and fraud against Richard and Brenda Harper." The lawyer smiled, a terrifying smile. "Consider it done." That night, my phone blew up. Dozens of missed calls from Brenda, Richard, Madison, and Liam. Voicemails alternating between vicious threats and pathetic, weeping guilt trips. "How could you do this to your own flesh and blood?" Brenda wailed on one message, "You're destroying this family." I listened to them sitting on the floor of my apartment, packing my things into cardboard boxes. They were right about one thing. I was destroying the family, but they had built that family on my back. It was only fair that I was the one to tear it down. The days following my meeting with Mitchell Davis, my terrifyingly efficient new attorney, were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Mitchell didn't just send a polite letter, he dropped a legal anvil on my parents' perfectly manicured lives. He filed the civil suit for the inheritance and immediately contacted the local authorities regarding the identity theft. The subpoenas hit the Harper household on a Tuesday afternoon. I know this because at 3:15 p.m. my phone began to vibrate with a frequency that threatened to shake it off my kitchen counter. When the angry voicemails didn't work, my mother deployed her favorite tactic, the flying monkeys. These are the relatives and family friends manipulated into doing the abuser's bidding. The first to call was my Aunt Caroline, a woman whose entire personality was based on attending church and judging people who didn't. "Cleo Harper, you listen to me," Caroline hissed through the receiver, skipping any form of greeting. "Your mother is practically having a nervous breakdown. The police showed up at a country club luncheon. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was for her? You are tearing this family apart over a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" I echoed, my grip tightening on the phone. "Aunt Caroline, they stole $60,000 in my name. They ruined my credit before I even knew what a credit score was." "They are your parents," she shrieked, as if that title was a get-out-of-jail-free card for felony fraud. "They paid for your food, your clothes, the roof over your head. You owed them. You call off these attack dogs right now and apologize to your father, or you are dead to this family." "I was already dead to them," I replied softly. "Now it's just official." I hung up and blocked her number. I spent the next hour blocking dozens of extended relatives, family friends, and even Madison's bridesmaids, who'd apparently been enlisted to harass me on Instagram. But the real twist, the one that finally shattered the facade of the perfect Harpers, happened 2 weeks later, during a mandatory mediation session. We met in a sterile, glass-walled conference room in downtown Columbus. I sat on one side of the long oak table with Mitchell. On the other side sat Brenda and Richard, flanking their own visibly stressed lawyer. Madison and Liam were not present, though their shadows loomed heavy over the room. My parents looked different. The smug superiority was gone, replaced by a frantic, cornered energy. Brenda's usually flawless hair looked brittle. Richard wouldn't meet my eyes. Their lawyer, a tired-looking man named Mr. Tumba, Sterling, cleared his throat. "My clients are willing to make a concession. They will formally renounce any claim to Nora's estate. In exchange, Cleo will sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding the financial discrepancies and withdraw the police report." Mitchell let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a terrifying sound. "Financial discrepancies? You mean the 3 counts of wire fraud and identity theft?" "No. My client keeps her inheritance because it is legally hers, and the police report stays. Your clients are facing prison time." That's when Richard slammed his fist on the table. "We didn't do it," he roared, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "We didn't steal her identity." I stared at him, genuinely confused. The IP addresses from the loan applications matched their home network. The funds had been deposited directly into their joint checking account. How could he possibly deny it? And first, Brenda burst into theatrical tears, burying her face in her hands. "Tell her, Richard," she sobbed. "Tell her the truth. We were just trying to protect him." My blood ran cold. Protect who? Richard swallowed hard, looking physically sick. "It wasn't us, Cleo. We didn't take out those loans. It was Liam." The silence in the room was absolute. Even Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "Liam?" I whispered. "Liam was 17 when those accounts were opened." "He was mixed up in bad things," Brenda cried, her voice muffled by her manicured hands. "Sports betting, online gambling. He got in deep with some very dangerous people. They threatened to break his legs, Cleo. We didn't have the cash liquid to bail him out. He knew your social security number from a school form. He did it to save his own life. We just covered it up so he wouldn't ruin his future." I sat back in my chair, my mind spinning. Liam, the golden boy, the star athlete who could do no wrong. He hadn't just been the favorite, he had been a parasite, and my parents had willingly served me up as the host to keep him safe. But then I looked closely at Brenda. I saw the slight hesitation in her eyes, the way she peeked through her fingers to gauge my reaction. I looked at Mitchell. He was already typing furiously on his tablet. He leaned over and whispered in my ear. "They're lying. The funds went into their account, and a week later they paid for the backyard pool installation and Madison's car. I have the bank statements. They weren't protecting Liam from gambling debts. They were trying to frame their own golden boy to save themselves from a felony conviction. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. There was no bottom to their depravity. They had sacrificed me for 26 years, and now, to save their own skins, they were ready to throw their beloved son under the bus. "You're lying," I said, my voice dead calm. "You spent that money on the pool. You spent it on Madison." Richard opened his mouth to argue, but Mitchell cut him off. "If you want to officially enter into the record that your son, Liam Harper, committed this fraud, I will happily amend the police report to include him as the primary suspect." Mitchell smiled, like a shark smelling blood. "The police will subpoena his records, investigate his alibi, and likely arrest him by Friday. Shall we proceed?" Brenda stopped crying instantly. She sat bolt upright, staring at Mitchell in horror. They were trapped. The fallout was catastrophic, and I watched it happen from a safe, heavily guarded distance. Faced with the undeniable paper trail and the threat of dragging their precious son into a criminal investigation, Richard and Brenda capitulated. The legal resolution wasn't a satisfying Hollywood courtroom drama. It was a slow, humiliating bleed. To avoid jail time, they took a plea deal for a lesser charge of financial fraud. The terms were brutal. They were ordered to pay full restitution to the credit agencies, clearing my name completely. Because they had lived far beyond their means for decades, they didn't have the cash. They were forced to sell the suburban house, the very house where I had spent my life feeling like a ghost. They had to liquidate Richard's retirement funds and sell Brenda's beloved luxury SUV. The social consequences were even worse. In a suburban town that thrives on appearances, a fraud conviction is a death sentence. Brenda was quietly asked to step down from the country club board. Richard's business partners bought out his shares at a fraction of the cost, not wanting to be associated with the convicted fraudster. The family dynamic collapsed entirely. When Madison's wealthy fiancé, a corporate lawyer named Bradley, found out about the criminal charges and the impending bankruptcy, he called off the wedding. He claimed it was due to irreconcilable differences, but everyone knew he didn't want to marry into a disgraced, broke family. Madison, furious and blaming my parents for ruining her life, stopped speaking to them entirely. And Liam? When Liam found out that his parents had briefly attempted to frame him for federal fraud to save themselves, the golden boy finally snapped. The illusion of his perfect, loving parents shattered. He dropped out of his tech startup, packed his bags, and moved across the country to California, changing his phone number in the process. In their desperate attempt to cling to their perfect image, Richard and Brenda had destroyed it completely. They ended up moving into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the wrong side of the city, ironically, just a few blocks away from the basement apartment I had once rented. As for me, I didn't stay to gloat over the ashes. The day the inheritance funds, all $450,000, cleared into my new secure bank account, I submitted my resignation at work. I packed my car, handed my landlord the keys, and drove out of Ohio without looking back. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but I knew what I was leaving behind. For the first time in my life, the silence in my car wasn't a punishment, it was a promise. I ended up in a small, foggy coastal town in Oregon. It was the exact opposite of the manicured, appearance-obsessed suburb I grew up in. The people here wore flannel, drank strong coffee, and didn't care about what kind of car you drove or what country club you belonged to. I bought a modest cedar-shingled house with a view of the crashing Pacific Ocean. I paid in cash. I adopted a chaotic, 3-legged rescue mutt named Barnaby, who looks at me like I am the center of the universe. I started taking pottery classes, getting my hands dirty, and creating things just for the joy of it. I work part-time doing remote logistics consulting, mostly to keep my mind sharp, but I don't grind myself to the bone anymore. I don't have to earn my right to exist. Healing isn't linear. There are still days when a certain smell or a commercial on television will transport me back to that dining room table, making me feel small, invisible, and unloved. There are nights I wake up in a cold sweat, terrified that my credit has been ruined again, or that I'll check my phone to find a vitriolic text from Brenda. But then I listen to the sound of the ocean outside my window. I feel Barnaby's warm chin resting on my foot. I look around at the life I built, a life funded by the only woman in my family who truly loved me, and protected by my own sheer will to survive. My parents treated me like a stranger my entire life. They taught me how to be invisible. They taught me how to walk quietly, how to need nothing, how to detach. They thought those skills made me weak, a perfect victim for their exploitation. They didn't realize that by teaching me how to be a stranger, they gave me the exact tools I needed to walk away from them forever. I am a stranger to them now. I am a ghost in their memories, just like I was a ghost in their house. But here, in this little house by the sea, surrounded by a chosen family of friends who love me for exactly who I am finally, wonderfully, fiercely alive. If you ever been the scapegoat of your family, know this: you do not owe loyalty to the people who broke you. You're allowed to walk away. You're allowed to choose yourself. If Cleo's journey to break free from her toxic family resonated with you, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe for more real-life stories. You are not alone.